Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
We see the syphilitic shrinking obelisk, the white man's wilting dick. We see through dangling jowls of seedy game show trolls the smiling lie of the televised hive. The witches are watching with their thousand eyes. Witches are watching with their thousand eyes. We smell rotten teeth that speak beyond belief. A stick inside their skull.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 47. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics.
Hi, I'm George Takei. You know me as Helmsman Sulu on Star Trek. When I'm not busy going Warp Factor 8, I like to beam down to Lee's Comics in Mountain View and spend a lazy afternoon reading comics classics from Marvel to DC, from Dark Horse to Fantagraphics, and everything in between. So please, spend some time here at Lee's Comics and spend your hard-earned cash.
The Fun Ideas Podcast is made possible by listeners like you and from Lee's Comics of California, selling you what your mother threw out since 1982, online at leescomics.com. I'm still working on my own Light Up Your Life travel agency, plus the Warren Kramer book, the TTV Underdog book, the Monkey Solo book, and the Mad book, plus all the articles I've discussed last episode, so I really have nothing new to report this week. Our guest today has his own comic book store, Flying Colors, and he is the creator of Free Comic Book Day. He's also an avid music fan. Here he is, Joe Field. On the phone today, I have Joe Field, who is the head of Flying Colors Comics and many other things, and we will learn that today. So, Joe, how are you today?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
All right, great. And, well, I mentioned Flying Colors. How many years has that been around? And I guess tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in selling comic books.
You want me to take up the whole hour on this question, right?
If you want. I mean,
No.
I got two other topics at least. So.
Well, you know, I've been in the business for a long time. We're coming up on 31 years for Flying Colors,
Mm-hmm.
and I know here in the San Francisco Bay Area that's definitely not the longest, because there are other shops that have been around quite a number of years longer than us. But it's been a good ride, 31 years. I got into it back in the 80s. I was working in radio from 78 to 88. I worked at one of the last media market AM top 40 powerhouses, KJOY, in Stockton, California. And when I was there, I did a promotion to have Stockton renamed the home of the official birthplace of the Fantastic Four. And that got me the notice of Stan Lee, basically, because when the story hit, it hit big. It made it onto the news wires like the Associated Press and United Press International. And I got contacted by a features writer for the LA Times named Chuck Hillinger. And Chuck and a photographer spent a day with me in Stockton just talking about this whole thing and taking tons of photos. And when that hit the newspaper, one of the things they did was they called Stan and to get a quote in there. And Stan was all behind my idea, and wound up coming to Stockton and having a big presentation on the steps of City Hall where he was given the key to the city, and Marvel delivered the official proclamation. and which now hangs in City Hall in Stockton. And from that, after that, which was a morning thing, Stan and I did a signing at a comic book store there, Al's Comics in Stockton, still going after more than 40 years. And we went to lunch, and at lunch he said, "Hey, kid, you did a really great job on this promotion." And I said, "Well, great, Stan. If you ever need anybody for public relations or anything, just give me a buzz." And I was shocked when a few months later he called and said, "Hey, remember when you told me?" And his wife's first novel was about to be published, and the publisher wasn't giving her enough promotion, so Stan wanted me to go out and drum up some interviews and reviews for her steamy little romance novel. And that got the attention of the guys who were starting WonderCon, which was at that point called the Wonderful World of Comics Convention, kind of an unwieldy title. So they hired me to do advertising and promotions, and then within 2 years I became one of the partners in the show. So then, 2 years in, that's when I opened Flying Colors and got out of radio.
Now, what possessed you to open a store at that point? Was it just because of doing all those other things, or you had always planned to?
I had all kinds of other ideas. During my time in radio, I thought about getting into the advertising agency business, so I interviewed with some agencies in San Francisco, and they all said, "Hey, you're going to have to start in the mailroom." And at that point, my wife and I already had our 3 young kids, and that kind of starting over thing just wasn't really going to work. I then went to the San Diego Con for a couple, 3 years before Flying Colors opened, and I was looking for other kinds of jobs in comics. They're outside sales reps, marketing directors, whatever. And in every case, I said, "Hey, you've done a lot. You'd be great for something else, but you don't have anything in publishing. So, sorry, can't use you." And one of those was I was interviewed by Bud Plant to be the marketing director for his distribution company, which was based in Grass Valley, California. And this was before Bud sold to Diamond Comic Distributors, which is now the big dog in comics distribution. But I interviewed with Bud for that, and I'm glad I didn't get it, because that probably would have meant to move to Grass Valley, and that would have gotten me further away from where I really wanted to be, which was back home in Contra Costa County, which is where I grew up. When all of those other things failed, and I wasn't given an entry into either publishing or distribution or advertising, I said, "You know what? I am probably better to strike out on my own and hate myself as a boss rather than be a lousy employee for somebody and not appreciate my bosses there." So I got into comics retail.
Now, did you have a big collection already, or did you have to start from scratch at that point?
Well, so at one point I had a really good collection, but to pay for my last year of college, I sold my collection. And that was in 1977. And it was a good collection. I sold it to someone who wound up being one of my competitors in the Contra Costa area. But no regrets on selling that. Then after my wife and I started our family in the early 80s, that's when I asked her, I said, I'd really love to be able to pass on my childhood love of comics to my kids. Is it okay if I restart my collection? And she said yes. Now, let's stop for a minute and appreciate that. Right? She's always been very supportive, and so she said, "Yeah, go for it." So I started to reassemble my collection, and here it is. I've got 3 beautiful daughters who are all doing wonderful things in the world, and none of them really care a whole lot about my Amazing Spider-Man collection. So there you go. But that sort of got me back into it when I was in radio there, and putting my collection together. And It just sort of reignited what I'd always known, that I'm kind of nuts for comics. And,
right.
So it was only really probably a matter of time before I really did something else with them other than read them.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because I didn't know really you worked in radio before, and I said, well, that's kind of a switch. So it's like to go from that to a comic book retailer. You must have come across a collection or just collected your collection yourself, as it were.
Hey, well, one of the things that was kind of fun when I did that Fantastic Four campaign, I wasn't in the business, but because it got publicity, I got calls from people in and around the Stockton area. Hey, I've got a collection. Do you know what I should do with it? Blah, 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 that sort of thing. So I'd go to different places in and around the Stockton area and check out people's comics collections, and in a few cases, I bought them. And my collection, though, really didn't become the basis of what we opened the store with. I really wanted to keep the two things separate.
Yeah, okay.
But what I did when we opened that was probably a really good thing for me to do was I stopped actively collecting comic books and adding to my collection then, because I knew that if good collections came into the store, I'd be wanting to compete with my customers for the stuff. It was like, oh, I can just put this one over here into my collection. And my deal was opening the stores. I knew I was going to have to sacrifice something, and it was really my comics collecting that got sacrificed, because I wanted to make sure to take care of the people who were coming in here rather than take care of myself.
Now, it's interesting. Maybe somebody told me before, but it just never crossed my mind. I didn't know you were the person that got the Stockton campaign and got in contact with Stan Lee. I mean, I knew about the Stockton thing, and I know about your history, but I guess in the many times we've spoken, it never came up. Yeah, so I'm sitting here going, how come I didn't know this?
The funny thing is, I'm not the one who contacted Stan Lee.
Oh.
What happened was, I did the crazy thing of going in front of the Stockton City Council and asking them to also get behind the petition that I had put into Al's Comic Shop there. And we had 350 or 400 people sign this petition asking Marvel to fix this glitch in their continuity, because in the original issue it said in Center City, and then later on writer Roger Stern amended it to it was called Central City, California. That's where the Fantastic Four were based. And when I looked at it, I said, hey, wait a minute. You've got all of these superheroes that are in New York. You've got some that are in Chicago. You've got the West Coast Avengers and Palos Verdes, for goodness sakes. But you're stuck with this Central City, California. And while there is an El Centro, California, there's no Central City, California. So I looked at the map and I thought, you know what, the most central city in California is Stockton.
Okay.
So I proposed having them make this continuity glitch go away. And initially they weren't too, enamored with the idea, because John Byrne had ideas to take Central City and rocket it 10,000 years into the future. And he did do that. In a story just before the 25th anniversary issue, which is when it does say that they are from Stockton, and where the thing is walking through the pasture in Stockton and comes up to the city limit sign and the whole bit. So, but when that whole thing happened, I got up in front of the city council. It hit the local newspaper, then it hit the Associated Press and United Press International, and that's when the LA Times got involved with it. And they're the ones who contacted Stan, because they knew that the editors in New York maybe weren't totally crazy about the idea, but when Stan got into it and said, it's our mission to save universes every day. This is the least we can do for good old Stockton, and funny enough, with that, they had Jim Shooter called me and he said, we really want to make Stockton. We want to represent it well in the comics. So if you could take a couple of rolls of film and just send us the prints, so that we have some actual footage, some actual shots to go from when the artists do this book. I said, well, great, I'll do that. Well, I did it, and it was one of Stockton's typically foggy days. Oh. So, I mean, they could have put anything into the book, and it would have looked like Stockton that day. But it was a fun little exercise to do that.
I still would like to. I know Stan, usually was very good-natured about things, but I wonder if the very first time he was told about it, he said, "What in the world? Why would we do this?"
I'll tell you something that's not a secret, and that is that Stan loves talking to the media.
Yeah.
So if the media called, then Stan was going to love the idea.
But
if it meant that maybe a camera was going to be put in his face, Stan loved the idea.
True.
And when we actually had the event on the steps of City Hall, every TV station from San Francisco, San Jose, and Sacramento and Modesto were there.
Yeah, I remember that part of it. Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. And Stan did interviews with each one of them and had a different line for each one of them, and he just loved being on that whole day. It was a pretty fun thing to watch.
Oh, well, moving from there, I know you went on to something that's actually just as significant in comic books as you originated the Free Comic Book Day.
Yeah.
You told me that story, but now we're on a podcast, so you have to tell me it again. How and why did you come up with something like that? Are you crazy, giving away comic books for free? Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a story. My late friend, my late and dear friend Bill Liebwitz, who ran Golden Apple Comics in L.A., called me after the first Free Comic Book Day in 2002. And he said, I didn't go to Hebrew school for 6 years to learn how to give things away. What are you doing? So, and he was ribbing me about it. It was a big success for him, as it was for a lot of different retailers. But the way the whole thing came about was I was on a deadline writing for an industry trade magazine called Comics and Games Retailer, and in that every month I would just give them 1,000 words off the top of my head about what was going on in the business, what my thoughts were, what I thought needed to be improved, that sort of thing. And I was kind of stressed for a deadline that day, and I looked from my office here out the front window and saw a line in front of the store, but the line wasn't coming in here. So went to investigate, and it turned out next door at Baskin-Robbins it was Free Scoop Night. No one told me it was Free Scoop Night, but but there they were, hundreds of people lined up to get a Free Scoop ice cream, and I looked at that and I thought, the only thing cooler than ice cream is comics, and if they can do it, we can do it. So I wrote the column, and it just came straight out and came out pretty easily. Drafting what this free event would look like. I called it Free Comic Night in that column, but Free Comic Book Day sounds a heck of a lot better. The thing that I did along with it was I asked my editor, who is now a best-selling Star Wars and Star Trek novelist, John Jackson Miller. I asked him if I could get Diamond comic distributors to respond to my article in the same issue in which it was printed, because back in those days, if I did an article, it wouldn't be published for another 2 months. It would take another month or so for any kind of feedback on it, and then another month past that for it to see print. But I really wanted to speed up that process, so we got Diamond to respond to it, and they immediately liked the idea. And that was 2001. I wrote that column in April 2001.
Mm-hmm.
It got published in June 2001. We went to Vegas to have a meeting as a part of one of Diamond's summits. It was attached to a convention there in Vegas, and which we met with. When I say we, my rep from the publisher, who was Maggie Thompson from the Comics Buyer's Guide, and then we met with some of the different publishers, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, DC, and a couple of executives from Diamond Comics. We sat around a conference room, and the first question was, well, do we do this thing? And they all looked around at each other, and it was, we have to do this thing. And for me, what's kind of poignant about that meeting was that was October 2001. That was the first time that a number of these publishers had flown out of New York post 9/11.
Wow.
And so there was a much different spirit of cooperation and camaraderie among different publishers than was typical of the business then or now. I had been a part of deals where retailers had asked publishers to pitch in and be part of like a got milk campaign for comics. And those always devolved into your lawyer has to talk to my lawyer, has to talk to that lawyer, that sort of thing. So in this one, it was none of that.
Wow.
It was total cooperation, and it was even Jim Valentino, then, who was the publisher of Image Comics, who suggested putting it on the weekend that the Spider-Man movie came out.
Oh, okay.
And for a competing publisher to recognize the value of Hollywood's promotion, helping Free Comic Book Day and helping out the comics industry, that was a pretty wise thing, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I always wondered why it was in May, the first weekend in May. So it was due to the Spider-Man promotion, basically?
When I originally put the column out there, I thought, hey, we'll do it in the springtime because that's generally when you're going to find more people where they are than if you do it in the summertime or try to do it around the holidays or whatever. So the spring was the better time for it. Even the free scoop nights were April, May, or June, something like that. So we decided it because of the movie. I think I originally thought that it should be sometime in mid-April, but having it the first weekend in May just pushed it off by 2 weeks, which worked for everybody.
And then in your original column, I haven't seen it, so sorry.
That's okay.
Did you envision what actually happened? I mean, that everybody would get together and put out one or maybe two issues with maybe new material or even reprint material at a discounted price for stores to buy to give out for free? Or was it not that thought out? It was just free comic books.
Well, it may not have been that thought out in terms of new material, because honestly, at that point, we were coming out of years of the comics sort of being in the doldrums, and it was a pretty difficult scene at that point. So there was a lot of comics that could be used for that would have been reprint comics that would have just been fine because nobody had read them anyway.
Right.
And a reprint isn't old to somebody who hasn't read it.
Right.
And still a fair amount of the Free Comic Book Day editions are previously printed material.
Right.
But the whole thing it wasn't necessarily about new or old material. It was about putting the best foot forward by giving in each comic, giving readers a full scoop, if you will. You know, if you give them a full story rather than a sample of something, they're much more likely to come back and want to get something else. If you give them a sample, it's easy to walk away because the experience
And that was in your original proposal, is just to have it a full book, like a standard book?
Yes. And that retailers would buy bundles of these from publishers at a greatly reduced wholesale cost, because we would all be sharing in this promotion.
Right.
And I think I may have even had it in there, but originally some of the printers were also selling to publishers at reduced prices or at cost, because they knew that this was an event that would lead to higher sales for the industry as a whole.
Right. Now, you said there was general cooperation, but was there anybody balking, going, we can't do that, I need to make money here, or something like that, or was everybody really in on it?
I think for the most part people were in on it.
Okay.
That's not to say that some publishers haven't found a way to make money on it, because because they'll always do that. But I think for the most part, publishers have found a way to pass along costs that are that make it affordable for retailers, and still make it something where a retailer is going to say, I'm going to order 6 million of these because they're free. That's a necessary thing. I get the question a lot from retailers: How come the comics aren't free to me?
Right.
Well, the price part of it is really just to harness the promotion a little bit, because if there were no limits on it, if there were no boundaries on it, the thing would fall apart instantly.
Mm-hmm. But even on that, did you have that in your original thought, where the costs would go, or was that not even planned out? That was planned out later.
I didn't have the specific cost, because honestly, not being a publisher, I wouldn't know what those costs would be.
Yeah.
But the idea was greatly reduced wholesale price, to make it affordable for retailers to give them away.
Okay.
The deal is, I take it back to the ice cream scoop.
Right.
Here, Baskin-Robbins corporate does this promotion did this promotion for all of their franchisees, and it was their job to promote it and whatnot. But each one of those franchisees was still paying for the ice cream.
Right.
It wasn't like the ice cream came to them for free to do the scoop night. And the same thing applies here. There are costs involved in every piece of this promotion, whether it's the actual promoting of it the Diamond does, or the warehousing and the distribution costs that the Diamond incurs, to the publishing and creative costs, to sometimes the creators waiving royalty fees to have their stuff in these comics, just to be able to get them out there, and the retailers paying their part of it too. It's definitely a shared cost, and it's one of those things that goes back to that old adage that a rising tide lifts all boats. The whole thing was about really trying to lift the comics business into a better place.
Mm-hmm. And in your proposal, when you thought of the idea in the first place, did you actually consult with the Baskin-Robbins company, or did you just go next door and ask quick questions, or did you just figure it out on your own?
I asked a couple of basic questions. The franchisee here at the time owned not only this store, but another store about 8 or 10 miles from here. And at one of the stores, they gave out 1,200 scoops.
Oh wow!
and at a smaller store, they gave out 950 scoops. So I thought, okay, that's a lot of people coming through, because there aren't people going back through that line to get more scoops. Usually, there isn't time to be able to do that. So I looked at that and I thought, that's just an amazingly great way to get people in the door.
Right.
And the whole idea is, if we can get people in the door who are interested in comics, even with just a minimum amount of interest in comics, we have the opportunity to show them all kinds of things that they didn't know was And that's been our goal since day one. It's not just a thing where it becomes a carousel of, here, give these comics and get out of the store. Here, we'll give you these comics, now get out of the store. No, we want people to come in here, experience what we have, see what we have, and be able to see the breadth of entertainment that can be found in comics, whether it's, nostalgic reprints from the 1920s or whether it's, super cutting-edge stuff from that came out this week.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's kid stuff or adult stuff, it doesn't matter.
Right. And in your plans, did you think that, this would also drive sales up of the non-free books, or was that not really in consideration? Or?
Oh, no. No, the consideration was always, this is going to be something that's good for sales.
Got it. Okay.
My background on that was that back to the radio days, one of the things I did in my last days in radio was I was working with the Northern California Comic Dealers Association to use their co-op funds. Marvel and DC Comics had co-op advertising funds available. If you promote their product in a specific way, they'll pay for 50% of the ads. And in some cases, because we were a group, they'd pay for 75% of the ads. On the rare occasion, we get them to pay for all of it. But from about 1988 to about 1991 or so, the Northern California comic dealers spent in excess of $250,000 promoting comics, and yes, our stores were mentioned, and it was a shorter number of stores that were a part of it. Not every store was in it, but we know that it helped sales in other shops. But past that, whether we were advertising Ren and Stimpy or Spider-Man or Superman, we knew that if the ads were well placed, well designed, and reached the audience, they'd get people into the store. And we found that they sold a lot of Calvin and Hobbes books for us. They sold a lot of Far Side. They sold a lot of back issues and random tchotchke kinds of things. That it was a matter of getting people in the door to see what we had. That made it a success. It wasn't that we were measuring the success solely on whether we sold those Superman or Spider-Man comics. It was how many people did you get in, and what were they buying. And so those by those metrics, it all worked very well.
Right. Now, I've probably participated as a customer since the first one, but of course, the number of titles has increased. I mean, it's probably over 100 titles each year now.
No, it's less than that.
It's still less than that?
No,
okay.
It's capped at 50 every year.
Oh, it is capped at 50. Okay, I apologize. Yeah. But when it started, how many did you have? Do you remember the first year, how many there were?
There were four main titles.
Okay.
DC, Marvel, Dark Horse, and Image. And then Oni Press gave us some backstock to use, as did a couple of other smaller publishers. But then it grew the next year and the next year. And at one point I think we had 63 or 64 comics as a part of it.
Okay.
And between Diamond and the retailers on the committee, we decided that it was just getting to be a little bit too much.
Okay.
That if we allowed everything in, then it would sort of reduce the specialty of what the day actually is. So that's when we put it to 12 gold edition comics, and the gold comics are that's the gold level are the ones that are in every store that participates.
Got it.
And then there are up to 38 silver titles, and those are ones that retailers can buy in on a smorgasbord deal. You don't have to buy them all. You can buy whatever you want of any of them. In addition to that, there have generally, over the last few years, there have been two comics that we're not calling Free Comic Book Day comics, but they are educational or informational comics that are a part of it. The CBLDF generally does one, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund,
right.
And then Gemstone does one that is an Overstreet price guide introduction comic.
Right.
So, technically maybe there are 52, but it's 50 comics plus the two for educating people about things.
Okay, because I haven't helped him in a while, but I used to help our mutual friend Lee Hester at his shop.
Yeah.
And so it seemed like it kept increasing, but that was a few years ago that I was helping him before I moved up here in Oregon. So, you put a cap on it. So I kind of understand why. I get a little unwieldy at 500 comic books on FreeCom.
Yeah. Well, and I will tell you, it's not an easy thing to have capped it, because I get the calls from the publishers who don't make it.
Yeah.
The ones that send in, we get in excess of 80 applications every year for 50 spots. And so that leaves 30 publishers out in the cold in terms of wanting to be a part of it, but not being voted in.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing. But if everything was easy to get into, nobody would want to be a part of it. So we have to have, again, some boundaries in order to make it all work.
So you're really actively involved in it still. It wasn't just an idea and then other people are now running it. You're actually there making decisions and everything like that?
In terms of how it works, Diamond still does most of that, but in terms of the comics that get chosen, I head a retailer committee that chooses the comics that go in.
Yeah. Wow. Because I never knew how active you still were with it. It's like, here's my idea, now you guys run with it or something. Or if you were,
the smartest thing I did was hand it off to Diamond, because as sort of the central conduit for everything comics related in the U.S. And Canada, they're pretty much the go-to spot.
Yeah.
In terms of distribution and facilitating things, getting flyers out to stores, getting information out, all of that. I wasn't going to be able to do that, and I knew that from the start. But I've still been regularly involved with it in terms of choosing the comics and working with Diamond on publicity, doing interviews for different media, and just generally being there as sort of a guide for it to make sure that everything stays on track.
Now, when this happens every year in May, do you see a spike in sales that's consistent, or just like the 1 week or maybe a week after and then it's done and you're like, back to the old drawing board?
Well, a lot of that depends on what we do with it. You know, there have been times when we've done sort of bounce back kinds of things where, the publishers bring out really highly anticipated titles the Wednesday after Free Comic Book Day or 2 weeks after that or whatever, and we're able to promote that on the day to try to get people back in.
Sure.
There are what I try to do is also have other events lined up post Free Comic Book Day to invite people back. But there's a huge sales spike on the day.
Right.
That week is usually our biggest week of the year. And I would say almost always it's our biggest week of the year, even above Christmas week. And that's not necessarily the case for every retailer, but for a number it is. The whole thing with Free Comic Book Day is, as I said before, it's a best foot forward deal. And if we are putting our best foot forward and giving people an experience that is memorable, they'll want to come back sooner rather than later. The thing about being a comics retailer, and this is so different than most any other line of work, and it's something that I have really keyed in on as the years have gone by, is that we comic retailers are in the enviable position of having stores in which people actively look forward to going to them, and then as they come in and get their stuff and check out, they're already looking forward to the next time they're going to come in.
Right.
You really can't say that about many businesses.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we're in the business of selling happiness on a daily basis, and people leave here happier than when they came in, and they were happy to come in.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful, beautiful deal.
Right. Now, I just wanted to ask you about this because it's a different kind of tactic, but it is similar as far as repeat business. It's the only thing I can think of similar to comic books would be the record business. And there are various record store days, but unlike the free comic book day, there's no free records. You actually have to pay for them, but they are usually limited editions or something like that. Is there ever a consideration to do another day or anything, or even on free comic book day, of having a few exclusives that customers would actually have to pay for?
I need to tell you about the other promotion I'm involved with.
Aha.
It's been going. We're about to enter year 5 with it.
Okay.
That's Local Comic Shop Day.
Okay.
Local
I've heard of that, actually, and I forgot about that. So yeah, thank you for reminding me.
Well, I got to put it more in the front of your mind here, Mark. Local Comic Shop Day this year will be November 23rd, 2019.
All right.
We are in the process now of announcing what some of the exclusive editions are that we will have for that day.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a nice lineup of stuff that will only be available from participating Local Comic Shop Day retailers on that day. Mm-hmm. Retailers can sign up at comicspro.org. But there's a larger story here I want to tell you about, because you've mentioned Record Store Day.
Yeah.
Did you know that Record Store Day came out of Free Comic Book Day?
I didn't know that, but I kind of figured.
So, if you let me tell the story, here we go, okay?
Okay.
So, Free Comic Book Day, happens in 2,200 to 2,400 shops every year, all over the world. It's now in like 60 different countries. A number of years ago, maybe it was the second or third Free Comic Book Day, a friend of mine who has 2 stores in the state of Maine, Casablanca Comics, run by Rick Lowell. Mm-hmm. He has stores in Portland and Windham, Maine. At his main store in Portland, his shop was right next to a record store, a small, a chain record store called Bull Moose. And the head of Bull Moose Records at that time was the head of the Independent Record Store Dealers Association. On Free Comic Book Day, he sees a huge line out in front of his store, but they're not going into Bull Moose, they're going into Casablanca Comics.
This is like a beginning of a funny comic strip. It's like, how come they're getting all the business and everybody has a line for something? Anyway.
That's right. Okay, so I can take this in a bunch of different directions, but anyway, the gentleman from Bull Moose contacts Rick, the owner of Casablanca, and says, "What's this going on?" He said, "It's Free Comic Book Day." And he looks at it and says, "We got to do this for the music business." And so when they put it together, they knew that they weren't going to be able to give CDs or vinyl or that sort of stuff away. They weren't going to be able to get record companies to give them stuff to give away for free, although there are a few little freebie things on Record Store Day. Yeah. But they'd be able to do limited edition things. And at that point, this was just before the vinyl revival, and they thought that maybe that was Record Store Day was the best way to really move into that collector's market, the market of collectible vinyl records. Mm-hmm. And so that's what happened. Record Store Day has become not only a day for CDs, but it was the sort of the primary mover of pushing vinyl back out into the public and making it a big deal. Mm. So I say this as a big music fan too, and a occasional vinyl collector. I I'm super happy that Free Comic Book Day led to this thing that's making record stores healthier and led to the vinyl revival.
Yeah,
so
I am too, since now I know that. So.
Well, and then there was one other thing. So after the first, I think it was the first 2 Free Comic Book Days, another industry looked at it and said, we got to do this. And it was the sports card industry.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay. And so I got invited by my publishers at Krause Publications and by the National Sports Card Manufacturers Association to go to their meeting in Hawaii. Oh, poor me. And they paid my way to go and tell them about Free Comic Book Day and how to make it work in the trading card market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was a kind of it was a really great meeting with all the heads of the different sports card companies in the room, and they didn't get along with each other super well like the comic publishers did.
Oops.
And so they wound up doing something they didn't. I recommended that they call it Free Trading Card Day, but they did not take that recommendation because they didn't want to look like apes to Free Comic Book Day, so they called it National Trading Card Day. And it honestly did not go over all that well. They're still doing annual baseball card day that I think happens in September. I forget, but none of them really grasped how to do Free Comic Book Day and in trading cards and do it so that it would really have a lasting impact. And that was also at a time when there was obviously huge competition among card manufacturers, but also a lot of infighting among them. So they were fighting about licenses, who was going to, So it wasn't until a few years after that we have one card manufacturer that has football, and another that has baseball, and another has this, and another has that. But they were all fighting each other for the same baseball license and for the to do baseball cards in a different way, and it was a difficult deal. So really proud of Record Store Day. Not necessarily as proud of National Trading Card Day. As a matter, we did National Trading Card Day that first time, and there was a big poster that they put out for it, and it was a nice poster, but it said across the top of it, celebrating the world's greatest hobby. And I looked at it and I thought, man, I don't think I can hang that in the window. Because there are comics are the world's greatest hobby, and I've built a business on it. I can't put something saying that something that's a minor sidelight to what we do is going to be the world's greatest hobby. So I took the poster and I doctored it.
I figured you put next to comics.
And I put celebrating one of the world's.
Okay.
And then across the bottom it said, "Comics will always be number one."
See.
So yeah, I still have that poster, and it's actually hanging up in our bathroom in the store.
That's funny. Now, for our last little topic here, I told you about our mutual friend Lee. He said, when you talk to Joe, ask him about music. So I've never talked to you about music, so there must be a reason to talk to you about music. But then you said you were in radio and stuff, and you are happy about Record Store Day. So what can you tell me about music that I should know?
What can I tell you about?
That's very generic.
Well, yeah, it is kind of generic. The thing is, early in the conversation, I told you that when I opened the store, I needed to stop collecting comics because I didn't want to compete with my customers, and that's true. What I did at that point was I went further into collecting music, but I also started to collect original comic art. And that was my way, because I wasn't going to be selling original comic art here, that I could still stay in the comics hobby but do it in a different way. So I've got a really nice original comics art collection here. Not one that I'm adding to a whole lot anymore because the market's gotten out of hand for me, but music sort of became my number one hobby. And I've always been a diehard music guy. One of my good friends growing up can tell you, going to a record store with me was always an experience, because I was the guy who was looking at the back of the album to find out who produced it, who engineered it, because I knew what kind of a sound it would have. So I'd buy a Carly Simon album because it was produced by Richard Perry, who produced two of my favorite albums by Harry Nilsson.
Right.
Okay, I'd buy Supertramp because Ken Scott was the producer, and he was one of the engineers on Abbey Road for the Beatles.
Oh, wow. So you really get into it. I mean, I would buy the album, just say, hey, I like Carly Simon, or whatever.
Well, hey, I'm talking way back when I didn't necessarily know the artist all that well.
Oh, so I see what you mean,
where I'd stretch it out, and this will really throw my cool cred right out the window, but I'd buy a Randy Edelman album because he's the one who wrote Weekend in New England by Barry Manilow.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so what I would do is I would take these strange avenues into different kinds of music. But growing up, I always loved just a really good pop, and I realized that after a while I was kind of a two-pronged guy when it came to music. That I loved power pop. So if it came out of the Beatles, the Who, the Raspberries, Cheap Trick, or you go on down in the Bay Area, Chris Von Snyder, or the Rubinoos, or different artists like that. If it came from that kind of a background or a sound, I was going to totally be into it. The other part of it was that I was always into prog rock. One of the first bits of music I bought for myself was a Moody Blues cassette back in like 1969 or 70. And I bought a, why in the world, I know, I can tell you why I bought a Procol Harum live with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra album in 1972. I bought that because I heard their song Conquistador on the radio, and I went, wow, that is a great piece of music. and I could not find the original album it was on, so I bought the live album it was from, and that live album turns out to be one of my all-time favorite records.
Yeah.
Or my friend who said, you want to try this album if you, because you like that stuff that sounds like a symphony, and so he gave me Electric Light Orchestra's El Dorado album. I went, okay, I'm done. Okay, so I'm now naming some of my favorite old records, but so what did that lead me to? It's led me to chasing all kinds of great bands, and one of those great bands is a band called Spock's Beard that has been around now for about 25 years. Originally based out of Southern California, they took what was happening with old prog music like Yes and Genesis and kind of synthesized it into something that was newer and different and super cool, with really big harmonies and some stellar playing and just all kinds of great stuff going on in it. And so my wife and I have seen Spock's Beard in all kinds of places. We've flown to Southern California a couple of times to see him. We went to the Three Rivers Progressive Festival in Pittsburgh in 2008 to see them and a bunch of other bands. And from getting back into that music when it was introduced to me, I got into Spock's Beard in about 2000 or 2001. And from that, we just started to see all these other bands and sample some of that stuff out. So between power pop and prog rock, I'm totally But one of the bands was Spock's Beard. After their original lead singer left, his name is Neil Morse. The second lead singer's name was Nick DiVirgilio, and Nick is a guy who auditioned to be Genesis' drummer when Phil Collins left.
Oh.
And is a fantastically gifted player. He not only plays drums, he plays guitars, he plays keyboards, he sings. He a number of years ago was the one of the orchestra or one of the music directors for Cirque du Soleil's Totem show that was touring all over the world.
Wow.
And when Totem was based in San Francisco, before they came here, and I knew they were on the way, Nick knows who I am because of all the shows that we've been to with Spock's Beard, that some of them might only have been attended by 20 or 25 people, that I contacted him and said, hey, if you're going to be in this area, do you think maybe you'd want to do a solo show in my comic store? And he said, oh, yeah, I'd love to do that. So the only day for him that was workable was a Monday because they were doing shows six days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gave me a list of dates, and one of them turned out to be my wife's birthday. And I said, let's do a birthday party, and you're going to be the performer. And he said, awesome. So it turned out it was her birthday party a couple of weeks before, about 10 days before her birthday that year. She fell down a flight of stairs, broke her leg and ankle, and so she was in a cast and in a wheelchair and planted right in the front row to listen to everything he said and all that he sang to her, singing her happy birthday and a bunch of great Spock's music.
Wow.
But at that event, he told us that he was leaving Spock's Beard and that he was in another band that we might like, and that band is called Big Big Train. They're a British band. They do have a Swedish guitar player, but it's pretty much an all British band except for Nick, who's American, and he's their drummer and background vocalist. Libby and I love this band so much that we took our first 2 trips to Europe to see them.
Wow.
In 2015 and 2017, we built trips to Europe around seeing Big Big Train in London. And it's a 13-piece band. There's 5 members of there's five members who play brass instruments, and then 8 others who play a variety of different instruments, from guitar, violin, keyboards, drums, you name it. It's out there. They feature one of their lead guitarists is Dave Gregory from the 80s band XTC. There's the pedigree is really strong. It's a fantastic band, and it's well worth checking out. And most of their music up until their most recent album, which just won the Prague Award yesterday for Album of the Year. So they're definitely in full flight in terms of their direction going straight up. But most of their songs have been about English history and different things of that sort. But with their latest one, they've expanded it. There's stuff about Mary and Percy Shelley. There's stuff about Leonardo da Vinci. It's an amazing piece of work called The Grand Tour. Well worth checking out for anybody who's into music.
Now, have they toured the U.S. yet, or no?
They have not, but news for your listeners: they will be making their stateside debut next May, the week after Free Comic Book Day.
Get that plug in.
My wife and I we're flying to Florida to see them.
Wow.
So, yes.
Cool.
So they're going to finally take on the States, and we couldn't be happier about it.
All right.
They're definitely on the way up.
Now, with all this music, do you just see live bands at this point, or do you still collect?
I buy a lot of music. I'm not sure that I would consider it collecting, but if you look at my CDs, you would say yes, he's a collector.
Well, I mean, you still buy things on CD or vinyl. You don't just stream like everybody else seems to do nowadays.
No. I'm still one of those guys who needs to decipher what they're saying. I get into the bands by looking up the lyrics online, but if they don't have them in a booklet with the CD. But I am also looking at, who's engineering the album, who's producing it, who are they using as guest musicians, what else have those guest musicians done that I should be aware of. So it's always trying to move on from one thing to the next to see if there's other stuff out there that I'll like that I might be missing.
Yeah.
We're still very much into it. I'm not I'm not a Netflix guy. I don't do Hulu. I don't do Amazon. Could blow up tomorrow and I'd be a happy guy. Please don't come and arrest me for saying that. But if Amazon just left the face of the earth, we would definitely all be better for it. And so I don't want to give them any business. So a lot of people will, take the lazy way out, and they'll buy their music either streaming or buy it via Amazon. But I still go to the band's website or to the musician's website and buy directly from them whenever possible, because I want to support them as much as possible.
Yeah.
If I'm going to buy the stuff, I want the person who's making it to benefit the most.
Right. I do try to buy everything in stores like yours or something like that over buying something online still. But obviously I can't be that rigid. If I want something and I can't find it anywhere, I have to go to Amazon or eBay or something. But I still put priority on the store, the actual physical store. Even if I know it costs more, I will still buy it in the store because...
Yeah, I get that, and the thing is, you don't need Amazon then, because there are if it's on Amazon, it's generally available from another source.
Right.
And what I found is, yes, there are a number of stores on Amazon that are selling, and so what I've done is I've just gone out the back door and contacted them directly. It's like I'd much rather buy it from you direct than buy it from Amazon.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
So that's what I've started to do. And there's some of this the prog music that I like. There are a couple of retailers that do a good job with it, as there are for the power pop music that I like. There's I like to support. There's a company called Cool Cat Music, and I used to be a big supporter of a site called Not Lame Music, which was had all kinds of great stuff. And so I found ways to do it without having to feed the beast.
Right.
Yeah.
I try my best at that way too, and I try to patronize stores or individuals like you're saying. I will buy directly too if I can on things, so.
And later today I'm going out to see a live performance. We're going into Oakland to see the Zombies and Brian Wilson.
Yes, I almost went to see them. They're up in Portland here. But I opted instead to go to see the Beach Boys, which is the other members of Mike Love and everything, because it was just cost of admission to the State Fair in Oregon. So it's like versus.
Well, that makes a big difference. Yeah. One of the best live shows I ever saw. Well, I'll give you two because it's the Zombies and the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
I saw Brian Wilson with his band play at Davies Symphony Hall about 10 years ago, and it was fantastic. It actually brought tears to my eyes when the whole band went into Surf's Up, because the harmonies on that thing are just so blissful, and it's a beautiful piece of music. It's as classical as any classical piece of music. Then about 15 years ago, when the Zombies had reformed, they didn't know how they were going to be received, so they did shows at small clubs. And one of those clubs was a place called Café du Nord in San Francisco. Holds maybe 300 people.
Yeah.
And that night, it was there were a couple of bands that opened up. I think Chris Von Snyder opened up, and there might have been another one of the local San Francisco power pop bands opening for them. But but the Zombies, when they came on, Colin Blunstone's voice is still beautiful after all these years, but it's like they made eye contact with every single person in there. It was an amazing show, and it was like a happening because before the concert, as we were lined up outside waiting to get in, there were so many people begging to buy tickets at huge dollars.
Yeah.
It was because they knew what this meant. This is one of the first times they were going to be able to see this band that hadn't performed together in more than 40 years. And it was that's high up there on my list of all-time live shows.
Yeah. I should probably go see them, but I'm always cheap. I don't know. But that particular week, I had seen the Beach Boys, Steve Miller, and REO Speedwagon. So it's like that.
Let me tell you. Okay, so we saw REO Speedwagon with Chicago about 3 years ago at the Concord Pavilion, and I have to tell you, I like REO Speedwagon's hits, but that was the first show on that tour, and so I should probably cut Kevin Cronin some slack. But I saw one of the absolute cheesiest things I've ever seen a performer do at a concert.
What?
He had a lyric sheet in his back pocket when the two bands started to do each other's songs with. So he brought the lyrics out on a sheet of paper in front of him to sing 25 or 6 to 4.
Oh boy.
It looked so Bush League, I could not even believe it. And I walked out of there going, you got to be more prepared than that. You know, you've got 7,000 people or 8,000 people who are there watching you, and that's what you're going to do. It was one of the worst things I've ever seen in concert.
Wow. Yeah, the only thing I've ever seen similar to that, which isn't really a bad thing, is I saw Michael Nesmith a couple of years ago, and he had a iPad that had all the lyrics to his own songs, but at least it was very subtle, you know. But I could tell that that's what he was doing because he can't remember them. So, you know, oh well. But at least he sang and he did it well, and you know. But I could tell that he's like having little memory problems there. So, oh well.
Yeah. The Brian Wilson does that too, but for other reasons. So it's I can understand it in some cases, especially in but I mean they were only singing big hits, right?
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, it was not a good look, but I've had so many other great concert experiences.
Yeah.
It's
so have I, and I can't go to everything. I mean, people listening go, "Why didn't you go to this?" And it's like, oh, geez, there's so many I have gone to. I could rattle off all these names. I mean, it's like I could say I saw Rolling Stones in '81, which I did for $15 a ticket. So I mean, it's like I've seen good concerts, folks. It's just I can't go to everything. So
let me give you one more story here then,
Mark,
while I got you, and that is this: my wife still has her ticket stubs from the 2 times that she saw the Beatles.
Ooh, wow. Okay, jealous.
At San Diego Stadium in 1964 and at Dodger Stadium in 65. So the Dodger Stadium show, I think, happened just before the Candlestick show, which was their last time of being on stage together in a concert performance, other than on the roof of the...
Right.
Yeah, anyway, so years ago, I was away at a Comics Pro industry conference, and Libby, my wife, surprised me with 2 things. Number one was a scrapbook of the concerts that we've been to in our 40 years together. Mm-hmm. And it's a thick scrapbook, and it has newspaper clippings and ads and ticket stubs and all of that kind of stuff, and it's all in chronological order.
Wow.
And the second part of it was she did a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet of all the concerts we've been to with dates, who opened for them, where we saw them, and and then another little column for was there any kind of weird little thing that happened or any stories that are memorable. And so I can now go into a concert spreadsheet spreadsheet and sort that in a bunch of different ways for venues, for dates, for bands, for whatever, and see all the hundreds of shows that we've been to in that time. It's that was definitely a work of love, but that'll show you how into music she is too.
So you're made for each other. I mean, I could say I'm into music, but that takes the cake. I was like, the only thing I can remember is, I saw McCartney down in L.A. when he first started touring again, and Stevie Wonder was special guest, unannounced, and so they did Ebony and Ivory. And for me to say, I've never seen the Zombies, but I did see Brian Wilson when he was with the Beach Boys in the 80s, sometime 87 or something like that, and he actually sang that night at the Circle Star Theater, because apparently the next night they unplugged his microphone because he was acting up. So I saw him the night that, and Carl Wilson was still around. Dennis had passed already, but it was still the pretty much classic band at that point. So.
Oh yeah. So. Well, we've had a number of great experiences over the years and seeing concerts and whatnot. But it's the last story I'll tell you is this, and this is another music story.
Okay.
To tell you how into music my lovely wife is. We've been friends since we were about 15 years old.
Oh wow.
We didn't start dating until we were like 20. But I can remember one of the early times going over to her house and looking at her record collection and seeing in this record collection that she had the Moody Blues and Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Joni Mitchell and James Taylor and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and there was Grateful Dead in there. There was all kinds of great stuff and lots of the Beatles and all of that. And I looked at the record collection and I just thought to myself, this girl is even cooler than I thought. and we really didn't start dating for another couple of years after that, but that was one of those foreshadowing moments where I went, something's really good here, and I got to be a part of this.
Wow. Well, that's great. Well, we talked about a lot of things. I guess to leave on a good note, anything you'd like to plug or promote your website or how they can contact you or the next Free Comic Book Day, anything you'd like to say?
Oh, sure. Well, the next Free Comic Book Day is May 2nd, 2020. It's always the first Saturday in May. Don't come in the second Saturday and say, where are the free comics? Because that happens every year. You can reach me at Flying Colors Comics here in Concord, California, any old time. We're at flyingcolorscomics.com, or you can get me on social media at FlyCoJoe on Twitter and Instagram, or we also have a very active Facebook page. Our website's still pretty active. I still add to the blog now and again, and there's some music stuff there. There's some baseball stuff, which we didn't even get into, and I could go on all day about that. But there's a lot of comic stuff.
Next time.
I'm easy to reach and hard to get rid of. So, have at it.
All right. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Joe Field, for being my special guest. Episode number 48 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2019 Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much and have a good night.
prescription pills in the pink electric church. The final flicker of your lewd jeweled boob to